My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House. One of the interesting things about question period is that the opposition, as well as any government backbencher, has an opportunity to ask questions of the government related to policy, or indeed also to make representations on behalf of their constituents, no matter where they come from in the province of Alberta. The question period in the Alberta legislature is among the longest in the country. It lasts for 45 minutes, but extension may be given to take it up to as long as an hour, as long as there is the unanimous consent of the House. And one day this week, we also then had 40 minutes worth of dealing with points of order that had arisen during question period.
Let us pray. Our Divine Father, as we conclude for this week our work in this assembly, we renew our thanks and ask that we may continue our work under your guidance. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 29, the Mental Health Act. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is developed from Bill 3, which was presented in the legislature a year ago, and on introduction of it, I'd like to thank those many people throughout the province who offered comment on Bill 3 that resulted in the development of this new bill, Bill number 29, which we would hope would receive royal assent during this session.
The Honourable Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care has moved first reading of Bill 29, Mental Health Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 29, Mental Health Act, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Moore, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Speaker, I beg leave to table the annual report of the Northern Alberta Institute in Technology as required by statute.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Table for the information of members, text of a petition signed by some 3,000 residents in Fort McMurray expressing their concern about the waste of taxpayers' money on administrative expenses at Cano College in the city of Fort McMurray.
Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the annual report for 1987 of the Alberta Social Care Facilities Review Committee.
Thank you. No.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Chinook.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 19 grade 9 students from Consort School located in my constituency of Chinook. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Kiersgaard, and parents Marlene Gould, Trudy Simpkin, Connie Wienick, and by Cleona Weiss. They are seated in the public gallery. I would ask that they rise and receive the customary warm welcome of this Assembly.
Member for Redwater Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to the rest of the Assembly today two members of the Smoky Lake Legion. They are the President, Walter Sombrowski, and the Secretary, Mr. Steve Vitejcik, and I ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. They're seated in the members' gallery.
Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With us today in the public gallery, Mr. Speaker, are nearly 24 young men of the 173rd Scout Troop from the Parkland community in the Calgary Fish Creek constituency. They've journeyed from Calgary to Edmonton today to visit the the legislature. They are accompanied today by their leaders, Joe Garrettson, Blaine Lawler, and Alan Rubel, and their drivers, Ray Gorham. I wonder if they might all stand in the gallery and be welcomed by the Assembly.
Member for Lacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure this morning to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature 24 members of the Bentley Christian Training Center, located in the heart of the Blind Man Valley. They're accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Dunker, Mrs. Cooman, Mr. Cooman, and Mrs. Allen, and also parents, Mrs. Ellerby and Mrs. Cooman. They're seated in the members' gallery, and I ask them to rise and receive the traditional welcome of the legislature.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labor. Mr. Speaker, there have been many complaints from vulnerable employees who have complained that their complaints about exploitive practices by employers are not properly dealt with. My question to the Minister, does the Minister continue to argue that the problems are caused by the fact that immigrants come from countries where police are not their friends and they need to be educated? Specifically, what has been done about the many complaints?
Mr. Speaker, I take grave exception to the remark of the Honourable Leader, who is criticising some excellent civil servants and members of the public service and alleging they're not doing their job. That's shameful.
Mr. Speaker, it's precisely these people that are complaining. One, Mr. Roger Lee from Calgary, was fired because he is trying to do his job, Mr. Speaker. And the policy we're talking about, not about the employees, the policies. And I have Appendix A of the Employment Standards, Dispute Resolution, Principles and Policy, under the introduction, and I quote, "The concept of prosecutions has been all but eliminated," unquote. My question to the Minister, why would the government bring in this outrageous proposal, a policy which says employers who violate the law shall not be prosecuted?
Mr. Speaker, I was well aware of Mr. Lee's complaints about the department, especially since he was dismissed for good and valid reason. That matter he has registered a good and he's gone through the right process, and he has registered a grievance under that matter, and that will be held in due course. I am not about to comment on Mr. Lee's specifics because of that. Now, when it gets to the specifics of the matter, the situation, as I've said before, is there are about 10,000 complaints a year registered with the employment standards. I've said before that a very considerable number of those are misconceptions and are not valid claims. The vast majority of the remainder are dealt with satisfactorily, and the employee gets their due financial recompense that they should have got in the first place. Further to that, we educate the employers as much as possible. Where there is evidence of persistent breaking of the law, then we recommend prosecution, and prosecutions do occur and they are successful. The main purpose of the department is to make sure that claims are investigated properly and that the employee gets the money that is coming to them. That is the main purpose. The main purpose is not to have prosecutions which may be counterproductive by delaying the eventual transfer of the money back to the employee whose rightful money it is.
Mr. Speaker, this is unbelievable. If a worker's caught stealing from an employee, they're going to be charged. But if an employer steals from workers, we're going to work with them, Mr. Speaker. My question is, where is the fairness of this? Why the double standards, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I've already explained the primary purpose is to make sure that the worker gets their due return. I can give some numbers. About 10% of the claims are found to have no valid grounds. Of the remainder, about a quarter of the remainder are settled over the telephone. It is that degree of minor misunderstanding that is involved. Of the rest, of the remaining 70%, about 90% of those are settled to the benefit of the employee with no further action required after an interview and an investigation. There are about 500 per year. go to the arbitration process through what's the name of it? Not an arbitrator, but there is an appeal process which goes to the appropriate person, sometimes a provincial court judge, and that settles a large number of the remainder. In actual fact, Mr. Speaker, the process is working very well for the benefit of those for whom it is intended.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be stuck for words trying to justify this policy, that's for sure, Mr. Speaker. What we're really saying, if you take the bill from the Solicitor General, if you catch a drunk driver, you're going to mediate and compromise, Mr. Speaker. Is that the same policy we'd be following here? My question is a very simple one that average Albertans want to know. Why is there a double standard? Why are there laws for the employers where they won't be prosecuted, but different laws for employees in this province?
There is not a double standard at all, Mr. Speaker. The standard is the same for the employers and the employees, and they are both treated fairly. One has to realize that in some cases the complaints are not justified, that in actual fact the employee may be expecting something that is not within the statute. There has to be fair treatment of both sides. And where there is a persistent pattern, where the employer does not learn from the education process, then the employer is prosecuted. In those situations, we do prosecute or recommend prosecution to the Attorney General's Department. On the other hand, there is little point in prosecuting where there has been a genuine error on the part of the employer and he has made restitution to the employee. This is not a police state, as the honourable member of the NDP party would like to have.
Thank you. Calgary-Buffalo supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, delay and frustration are the lot of those who have to deal with the Minister's Labour Standards Branch, and I'm wondering whether the Minister will do the right thing and agree to an independent review of the way in which his Labour Standards Branch is not doing the job in this area.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo is once again throwing insinuations about the function of the members of the branch. They do their job, they do it well, they do it to the satisfaction of the vast majority of those who wish to be served by the branch. The policies of the branch are under review at all times on a continuing basis, and where we find changes needed, then we make the changes. There's no need for an independent inquiry.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In spite of the Minister of Agriculture's repeated claims that an ethanol industry would not be viable in Alberta, there is an industry alive and thriving in the town of Minnedosa, Manitoba. And the mayor of that fine community said in a letter to the minister, Mr. Speaker, as a prairie community which has benefited substantially from Manitoba's 7-year-old program, I and members of council would like to take this opportunity to invite you and other interested members of the legislature to visit our town and see.
Honourable member, let's not have such lengthy quotes from letters in question period. Interrupt. Leader of the Opposition. Thank you for your kind advice. Totally unsolicited. Thank you, member for Vegreville.
I'd like to ask the minister if he will confirm that he'll accept the gracious invitation of the Mayor of Minnedosa and travel to that community to see firsthand the benefits of ethanol in action.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate very much the question by the honourable member. We received a fax of the invitation yesterday, and as I indicated to Paul Cashman of the Edmonton Journal when I was talking to him last night, that we were examining the possibility of accepting the invitation if we could fit it into our schedule, because I'd very much like to continue on with our very objective analysis as to what we would do for the ethanol industry, unlike the honourable member who has proven not to be so objective.
Well, that's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, because the minister says part of his objective consideration is sending the author of these thoroughly discredited and negative reports on ethanol in his place. And I'd like him to confirm that he will go. I'll go with him.
Mr. Speaker, his kind invitation is enough to deter me from going. But in view of the fact that he's not been very fair in presenting the two reports, I want to stress the criteria in which we put those two reports together, Mr. Speaker, because he obviously is taking a very negative aspect. We want to do so on an objective basis, whereby we want to increase our markets for agricultural products, we want to improve our environment, We want to make sure that our industries operate within the law. We want to create new economic opportunities for Alberta citizens, and we do not want to create industries that will be a burden on the economy in the long run. That's the criteria with which the report was put together, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm happy to indicate to the honourable member, regretfully, there was an error as it related to foregone revenue. That was the only error to date that has been uncovered by all parties. We are using this paper for discussion purposes only, Mr. Speaker, and I should share with the honourable member, too, so that we do view these things on a very objective basis. If the honourable member is not aware, there were just 6 plants that closed in Louisiana that produced ethanol because of the lack of economic viability. And Mr. Speaker, we've got to view this, and I'm going to look forward with great expectation to the public meetings, because we've got to do so on an objective basis so that we do have a net benefit to the agricultural community. And Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm pursuing on a very active basis.
It's a shame to hear the minister contradict the direct experience of the people in the town of Minnedosa, and I'm concerned that his enthusiasm is beginning to peter out. And I'd like him to stand up and tell us why he is not prepared to accept immediately this invitation so that he can go and view firsthand and have experience that's of benefit to farmers and producers in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, again, it's a distortion of the facts that the honourable member is attempting to convey to this Legislative Assembly, whereby I answer that question in his initial question, whereby we are examining the possibility of accepting that very kind invitation. But the honourable member persists in attempting to distort the facts, as he has consistently done in this entire debate as it relates to ethanol.
Well, final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The minister said in his initial press release that I am placing this matter on the agenda at the National Agriculture Ministers' Conference, in spite of the fact that it was on the agenda for a month before he even thought of it, and that can be confirmed in Ottawa. Does he not realize that if he wants to be seen as a promoter, as an advocate of this worthwhile industry at this meeting in Toronto, that it would be in the best interests of not only his image but the industry in Alberta to go there with some direct first-hand experience and share that with the ministers in Toronto?
Question at an end, honourable member. Thank you.
Unlike the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, I'm not worried about image. I'm worried about doing something for the farming population.
Redwater Andrew, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since we know that our government is trying to diversify in any way possible to help the grain farmers in Alberta and Canada, and it's known that Mohawk Oils Canada owns the ethanol plant in Winnipeg, or not in Winnipeg, Minnesota, but Manitoba. To the Minister of Agriculture, could the minister tell the House why some Mohawk service stations have pulled out the EM10 gas formula from their sales pumps in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, that has been brought to my attention, but I don't know the reasoning behind it, and I'm more than happy to investigate it for the honourable member.
To Edmonton Meadowlark.
To the Minister of Agriculture, could the Minister of Agriculture please indicate to the Legislature what steps he is taking to correct the errors in the report so that the public hearings process can be based upon proper information, that everybody can know exactly what the facts are?
Mr. Speaker, what we have done is, and the errors already have been corrected with the follow-up from both the Alberta Grain Commission and the Touche Ross Consulting Group, whereby and we're grateful that the errors were uncovered and that corrective measures have been taken, because it has underscored the importance of us following through with what we had originally planned to have discussion amongst various groups as it relates to the establishment of this industry.
To main question for the Liberal Party, Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a question to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Proposed amendments to the Public Health Act provide for quarantining of AIDS carriers who place others at risk. We support the concept that action may be required in extreme cases, but only with the greatest protection for civil liberties. Unfortunately, the means by which this is being done in the Public Health Act gets a grade of only 1 out of 10 for protecting civil liberties, particularly compared to British Columbia, which has addressed the same problem. Now, Mr. Minister, in light of the reality that a form of imprisonment is being sanctioned, why did the minister not adopt the BC model and require that any isolation order re-AIDS carriers be made by a provincial court judge on the application of a public health officer so that an element of judicial protection can be inserted into this very heavy-handed process?
Mr. Speaker, I take exception to the honourable member's comments and would say that there is no form of imprisonment here. The isolation orders provision in the Public Health Amendment Act are precisely the isolation orders that we have had in the Act for curable infectious diseases for the last 20 years. I would agree with the honourable member that these isolation orders will be imposed only in the most extreme of cases, and that we have ensured in the original part of the Act that all citizens will be protected and their civil rights will also be protected.
Well, that's not so, and this isn't isolation for contagion, it's isolation for conduct. It's conduct that's an issue. Now, in BC, the medical health officer has to initiate all quarantine proceedings with respect to AIDS and provides a much-needed buffer between the doctor and the carrier. Now, why has the minister decided to allow medical doctors, of whom there are hundreds, to issue isolation orders instead of requiring that any action be initiated by medical health officers who can more effectively be educated in means of protecting the public while also protecting the civil liberties of AIDS carriers?
Mr. Speaker, I want to put the provisions of the bill in the proper context. The honourable member and all honourable members know that our approach to AIDS has been one of through education. That was announced last October, and virtually all of our efforts and certainly all of our dollars are going to the only way that we can combat this disease, and that is through education. The provisions in the Public Health Amendment Act round out that circle. A very small portion of our effort is going to this last resort initiative. Mr. Speaker, again, I take exception to the honourable member's comment. This is isolation for disease, and that this provision is there as a last resort provision to protect the public health of all Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, the minister can do so much better and doesn't seem to realize it. Now, the Public Health Act, our act, provides that any person, it's not just a doctor or medical health officer, but any person can bring an application for quarantine before a provincial court judge. Now, why leave individuals who are carriers of AIDS open to abuse by any busybody instead of requiring that a public health officer be satisfied before such proceedings can be started, again as in BC? They've looked at it, they know the problems, and they've got sensible solutions.
Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied that the way that isolation orders have been imposed for curable infectious diseases in Alberta since 1905 should properly apply to those same diseases which are in fact incurable.
To the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, these procedures also raise serious Charter of Rights issues, and I'm wondering whether the Attorney General can advise what procedures he has set in place to ensure that all legislation which may infringe on personal liberties is in fact reviewed for compliance with the Charter of Rights, and whether his department has reviewed these Public Health Act measures specifically for compliance with the Charter. Are these all right, in his view?
I don't know which question to answer, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member persists in asking so many questions in the supplementaries. There are procedures, of course, with respect to review of all legislation as it may impact upon the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and those are taken into consideration as legislation is being drafted.
Edmonton Centre supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, did the Minister of Community and Occupational Health consult with AIDS Network of Edmonton, AIDS Calgary, or his own Provincial AIDS Advisory Council before he brought in these amendments?
Mr. Speaker, I consulted with a number of individuals throughout the province before we brought these amendments in.
Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Lethbridge West.
Speaker, my question is to the Premier and followed to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. To the Premier, in the last few months and in the last few days, I've noted with concern the continued decrease in the economy of rural Alberta. Notified in the last day of a very significant business in southern Alberta that is closing its doors. I've also been in contact with others that are in severe financial trouble. As the chairman of the Agriculture and Rural Development Cabinet Committee, my question to the Premier is, has the Premier a formal procedure in place to monitor this rural economic crisis at the present time, or is the information that comes to the Premier by general information or in a general sense from the various MLAs? But my question is there a formal procedure in place to document continually that crisis that's out there so that in turn we can deal with it in the best possible way?
Yes, there is, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if that policy is in place, could the Premier outline specifically the formal approach that the government will use to deal with that rural economic crisis? And I'm not only talking about AADC or other government, programs where we've attempted to assist in input costs, but I'm talking about a formal approach, a concerted effort on a broader plane that will deal with that economic crisis that's facing farmers and agribusiness and dealers that are trying to serve the farmers of this province.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the government is constantly surveying and watching what is happening. It's all very well for the honourable member to say, don't talk about your programs. Well, how can you do that and say, but tell us what you're doing to help? Because obviously the programs are there helping. The Beginning Farmers program of 6% interest to farmers, I mean, that is helping. The $2 billion of low fixed interest rates for 20%, that is helping. The $1 billion for small businesses, and many, many, many of them are in the ag and rural economy sector of our province. That is helping. The low prices for energy to farmers, that's a massive assistance to farmers, and that is helping. The low fertilizer prices to our farmers, that is helping. Mr. Speaker, we are the assistance with meat processing plants that are opening in rural Alberta, that is helping. We are doing these things. The assistance recently with industries in southern Alberta, and the honourable member is talking about southern Alberta now. There are new industries helping which strengthen rural Alberta because they're located in those areas, and it helps for the rural economy because it flows into those communities. Those are all things that are helping, and we are very concerned and working constantly with our farmers and ranchers, their organizations, through the government's district agriculturists, through reports to Cabinet by our both ministers involved in agriculture. The Minister of Economic Development and Trade may well want to also supply information to the honourable member because he is working in this area constantly.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Associate Minister. To support a number of these businesses that are in financial trouble, we need to keep the farmers on the farm. To the Associate Minister, will the Associate Minister be announcing changes to the AADC policy prior to September the 1st of 1988, which will be the time when new decisions have to be made with the current farmers that have already faced quit claims and various changes in their arrangements in terms of farming? Will the minister be able to announce policy at an early possible date so that we can assist farmers to stay on the farm for at least in 1989?
Thank
you. Mr. Speaker,
I think we just did announce a major policy which is directed at strengthening the rural communities, the commodity-based index deferral program. We've done that because we want to maintain the purchasing power of the rural communities. We want to maintain rural schools. We want to strengthen the agricultural sector as a whole. And, Mr. Speaker, the response that I've been getting from people in agriculture is that it is working and it is helping. In terms of new announcements, specifically before September the 1st, the announcement that I intend to make before September the 1st would be in relation to the Beginning Farmer program and some new directions it may take that will not have any implications for the current Beginning Farmer programs. We've announced a number of changes that have been made to give those people options for restructuring their debt and maintaining their agricultural involvement.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. The new policy that came out in May was requested last October, November, December, January, and finally come out in May. Could the Minister then confirm that during this period between now and the announcement of the new policy just mentioned with regards to the beginning farmer, that all decisions possibly facing beginning farmers now will be put on hold until such time as that new policy is in place and can be used in tandem in analyzing these new, these beginning farmers' policies that they're facing at the present time?
No, Mr. Speaker. What I'm talking about is a program for beginning farmers, people who want to get into agriculture. I think that we may be able to make some changes in the beginning farmer program that will meet the beginning farmer's need in a better manner, and that's the program I intend to announce. In the meantime, we have to get on with the decision-making and the opportunities for farmers who are presently in agriculture to make decisions. The last thing that most of them want is the government to put a hold on those decision-making options.
Bakerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Associate Minister, when she announced her index deferral plan, she made it clear that it was available only to those farmers who weren't in arrears. In other words, those who don't need it would likely receive it, and those who do need it are ineligible. And I'd like to ask her if she would consider, if a person's payments are in arrears and it approximates the amount that they'd be eligible for under the two-year retroactive provisions, that they would be considered for the benefits of this program as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member's comment is absolutely wrong. The program did not say that someone who is in arrears was ineligible. In fact, part of the program is to allow for deferral of arrears. And, Mr. Speaker, there is some criteria where a farmer may become eligible for deferral of arrears. Number one, he has to have a genuine intent to repay his loans. Number two, repayment problems have to be attributable to unforeseen circumstances, drought, low commodity prices. Three, management ability has to be satisfactory. And four, the borrower did not accumulate assets at the expense of ADC. He also has to be able to show that there is a workout plan and that there is some hope for the operation. There is no point in looking at arrears and where there is absolutely no opportunity to show a workout plan or repayment ability. But by all means, someone who can show that there is a possibility for repayment and it can be demonstrated is eligible to participate in the plan.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture. I wonder if the Minister has any figures to share with the Assembly vis-a-vis the amount of farm bankruptcies last year compared to this year in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to share with the Assembly that in the year 1987, for the first year since the year of 1980, farm bankruptcies actually decreased by some 24%. They decreased to 71 from the previous year of 93. If we look at our farm numbers by province, we in this province have gone through the smallest decline, whereby our farming population has only decreased 0.5 percentage point, 81 over 86, Mr. Speaker, the smallest of any province. If you look at our production as it relates to bringing on new land, we've increased our acreage by some 1 million acres, 81 over 86. And Mr. Speaker, statisticians indicate it is as such because of our strong support for the agricultural community, whether it be marketing initiatives dealing with trade or the internal development of the agricultural economy within our province.
Calgary-Buffalo, final supplementary.
Thank you. This supplementary is to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, Mr. Speaker. One of the ways of helping rural areas is to provide opportunities for diversification of activity by farmers, and I'm wondering if the Minister can tell us about one of those opportunities, namely what progress is being made with respect to his small power policy, which is such an opportunity, particularly in the south.
Thank you. We're now moving on to the Lethbridge West, followed by Edmonton Glengarry, Edmonton Meadowlark, Cardston, Edmonton Belmont, and Edmonton Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question to the Minister of Labour in his capacity as Minister responsible for personnel administration. Last year, Mr. Speaker, the Government of Alberta announced in its fiscal plan until 1990 to reduce the public service, and I'd like to pose a question to the Honourable Minister with regard to the Employee Flexibility Assistance Program, Mr. Speaker, that applied to those public servants over 55. Could the Minister share with the House the approximate number of public servants who took advantage of that program and what the approximate cost has been to Alberta Treasury?
Mr. Speaker, the total number of participants was slightly under 2,000, 1,800 and some, I think. Of that number, some were, of course, in boards and agencies rather than the direct public service. And as we know, excuse me, a considerable number in management and administrative positions. The cost to the Treasury in direct cost was some $34 million, but in addition to that, of course, there were some savings in that not all of the positions have been filled subsequent to the taking of early retirement by the people concerned.
A supplementary, Mr. Speaker. An integral part of that program was to assist these people who left the civil service under that program to have counseling, etc., to get back into the workforce. Those private counseling firms were hired according to the annual report so that they would assist these people. Mr. Speaker, my supplementary is that program ended the end of March. Is the counseling service still available to those public servants who left under the Early Retirement Incentive Program?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as members will remember, there was some flexibility in the program that allowed for a mutual consent process to allow deferral of the early retirement where the department felt that they wished somebody to stay on for a restricted length of time and the individual was willing to stay. The service of the outside consultant to the people who took early retirement was terminated a reasonable time after the individual had taken the early retirement. It is possible that there are some who are still getting counselling, but I don't have direct knowledge of it.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. An integral part of that program was innovative thinking by the government in terms of the Employment Options Program or flexibility and job sharing. It was quite innovative a year ago. Could the Minister share with us whether or not the job sharing attitude where people could take a leave of absence without loss of seniority has been successful in the context of allowing those people to come back into the government service and assisting those who would normally have been laid off from the government?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have direct knowledge of all of the people who took advantage of that, since the individual departments now have a very considerable degree of flexibility. The Personnel Administration Office has ceased to be a controlling organisation and more one of education and assistance to the individual departments. On that basis, we do not have centralised figures for the numbers who took advantage of job sharing and the other alternatives that were made available. I should comment, Mr. Speaker, about the cooperative role that the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees played in this exercise, and indeed they brought to us the concepts for the early retirement part of the package and worked with us in the development of it and the implementation of it. It has, I think, been a good demonstration to Albertans of what can be achieved by cooperation between employers and employees and the unions.
Yeah, final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, one that's important, I think, to many taxpayers in Alberta. Have any of these people, Mr. Speaker, who took advantage of the Employee Flexibility Assistance Program been hired or rehired by the Government of Alberta, either in the capacity of an employee or under contract to this government?
Mr. Speaker, the program was introduced on the basis that those who took early retirement would not be eligible for rehire by the government or for contract positions. We have, with one exception, managed to stick to that, the exception being due to the unfortunate death of Mr. Scareco, the chairman of the Alberta Liquor Control Board. Mr. Joe Forgione, who had been for a long time the senior administrative officer of the board, has come back for a fixed period of time to assist until a new chairman can be appointed. That's the sole exception that I know of.
Supplementary, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Supplementary to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Has the Minister considered the problem of people over 50 who are being retired early for one reason or another, frequently because of job loss or business failure? Has the Minister considered that problem and considered implementing programs of retraining to assist those people in adjusting to a very, very hostile employment environment for people of that age?
Mr. Speaker, we do have a couple of areas. One is that many of our programs are not restricted to age. Individuals can access our retraining programs and many of our employment programs irrespective of their age category, although the emphasis in our programming is on youth between the ages of 16, 17 years old to about 25. We do fund non-government organizations in our department, Mr. Speaker. The Opportunity 45 is a good example. We fund them in Edmonton, Calgary, and Lethbridge, hoping that we can assist particular organizations who are dealing with people who are in this category. But certainly we are aware of it, and we do on a regular basis review the concerns of that age category. It's a difficult situation, Mr. Speaker. I do acknowledge that.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I recently asked the Premier about expensive improvements to Highway 40, the Premier did nothing to allay fears that the government is in fact planning extensive development in the area at some future point, but is still in the denial phase and waiting to make an after-the-fact announcement. In addition to the cost of winter surfacing the road and roadside parking areas of a summer-use road, the government purchased Highwood House, which is a gas station with cabin rental accommodations. Can the Premier confirm that the original reason for the government purchasing Highwood House was to close it and move it out of this critical habitat area?
Mr. Speaker, those are responsibilities that fall under the Minister of Transportation and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, the purchase of that particular property was back in my days when I was Minister of Tourism that I was involved with that at that particular time, and there was the moving in of some buildings from the Banff National Park. There were second buildings, and at that particular point in time we had suggested that we would keep the site there as a service center and remove some of those that were in there on a part-time basis.
Well, it certainly doesn't agree with Kananaskis Country Recreation Development Policy Review, which said the current location of Highwood House and its operations are unacceptable and will be moved before the 1982 summer season, so it seems to have taken a long time. Can the Premier explain why the facility of Highwood House is now being upgraded rather than removed from the sensitive area as was originally planned?
Mr. Speaker, we always intended to upgrade the facilities along that highway.
Thank you. That certainly is not what the regional wildlife biologist Harold Carr thought when he said, now that the government has bought the place. Surely we can close the cabins and campground immediately, and that was supported shortly after.
Thank you, honourable member. It is a supplementary.
Thank you. I'm just wondering why that advice and other advice given over a long period of time about the important reasons for closing that area was never followed, even though it was the original policy of the government.
Thank you, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation and Utilities may wish to supplement my answer, but I'd point out to the honourable member there are a lot of people who want to have input into how various parts of our province are developed and used. And we certainly are not restricted to those with one point of view. I can remember, Mr. Speaker, being in this legislature when many people said there should not be a Kananaskis country. There should not be a Kananaskis highway. They said that should be left for people who want to participate in that area in what they called the man-horse package, that a person who would be able to enjoy that area would be the individual who went in on horseback. Well, obviously, there were an awful lot of Albertans who said, no, that's our heritage as well. We want to enjoy that beautiful part of Alberta. And the government, there was a great deal of concern by some people, but it was done in a sensitive, environmentally positive way. And now Albertans from all over this province are enjoying something that very few people were able to enjoy in the past. Now they're really enjoying it. There's a tremendous support all over Alberta. And those are the kind of things that it's necessary to do. Now, I understand the honourable member has quite a narrow point of view about some of these things, but he should think about his constituents here in Edmonton who also want to participate in that area as well.
Thank you. This document states that the government's policy was to close it and that they even canceled Husky Oil's lease on it for that purpose. So it's hard to comprehend what the Premier is trying to say there. Will the Premier assure us that he does not have plans for extensive winter recreation development in the area and that Highwood House will be closed and relocated rather than being used as a springboard for that kind of development?
Mr. Speaker, I'll assure the House that the government will continue to take into account the interest of all Albertans in providing opportunities for them to enjoy this magnificent province.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister responsible for tourism, could the Minister please tell us whether he has made any representations to the Premier or to his other Cabinet colleagues indicating that this obsession with the southern part of Highway 40 is uncalled for, is not environmentally sound, when in fact Highway 40 in the north between Grand Cache and Grand Prairie could be developed properly to provide tourist opportunities for an area of this province that requires an improvement in tourism, an improvement in tourist opportunities.
Thank you, honourable member. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go. Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, we would like to have all ideas considered in the province. As you know, we're asking every community and Albertans across this province to get involved in the community tourism action planning, IDs and MDs included, and I'm sure if anyone in this House has some ideas what they would like to see in tourism in the future, this is the year. Put your ideas in writing and send them to the ID, MD, county, town, village, hamlet, city that you're talking about, and have them included in their community tourism action plan so we can look at them.
Member for Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest.
Question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Transportation. Would he give consideration to upgrading Highway 40 from the Crow's Nest Pass to Highwood House so that southern Albertans will have equal access into Kananaskis country?
Mr. Speaker, Highway 40 has been a very important artery in the north-south movement of traffic within the province, and the priority from the north to the south is reasonably equal, and I say that all other things being equal, and I'll take the honourable member's representation.
Edmonton Meadowlark, main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people in Alberta are being faced with this prospect that the free trade agreement between the United States and Canada may actually be implemented. Responsible government should be anticipating the potential positive impacts and the potential negative impacts to provide for the opportunity to capitalize upon market opportunities in the United States where they will exist, but more importantly, to provide transition for those people who will lose businesses and who will lose jobs. Given cuts in overall funding to Economic Development and Trade's International Trade Program, given a paltry increase to export service programming in that department, and given the threat now of cuts, substantial cuts to wage subsidy programs in Alberta, one can only wonder whether this government is accepting that responsibility. To the Premier, is the Premier advancing under the assumption that the U.S.-Canada trade agreement will actually be implemented?
We're always advancing.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Will the Minister of Economic Development and Trade please tell us what specific programs of consequence that his department is undertaking to identify opportunities for small businesses in this province in the United States, and how is he communicating that information to small business entrepreneurs in this province?
Mr. Speaker, it's been an important part of our strategy over the past 2 years to develop programs to assist Alberta companies to access trade opportunities, not just in the United States, but throughout other market areas of the world, Pacific Rim, Europe, and other areas. We announced, and if the member had been paying attention, he would have known that we have announced a new management assistance program to assist Alberta companies to be export ready to access markets in the United States. We've strengthened our offices and our trade directors' capability to assist companies in identifying opportunities. We also have reinstated and expanded our export services support program. Our export loan guarantee program has assisted a number of companies in being able to access markets in the United States. So the emphasis on the U.S. market as well as other markets has been well established over the past 2 years.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Supplementary, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, how can the minister stand in this House and say in any seriousness that in fact he has emphasized those areas of undertaking in his department? He has cut international trade development budgets, he has cut program marketing budgets, and he has only increased export services by $800,000 on $1.6 million. What is he doing to support Alberta business in confronting a new free trade, the potential new free trade context within which they...
Thank you, Honourable Member. You've now asked 2 questions in this supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I've dealt with the questions earlier in question period and also during estimates.
To the Minister of Career Development and Employment, could the Minister please indicate what specific programs he has planned to assist those people who will lose jobs, those business people who will lose their businesses, to assist those people in making transition from lost jobs to the potentially newly created jobs? No, it hasn't.
Mr. Speaker, I should firstly say that entrepreneurs and Albertans don't need governments to tell them where the opportunities are in the free trade arrangement. Secondly, I should let the Honourable Member know that the Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Trade and I are participating with Norman Wagner, who is on a federal committee for labour market adjustment as a result of the free trade agreement, if in fact there is a need for adjustment here in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, I should let the Honourable Member know that 4 million Canadians a year change jobs. So to suggest that because there is going to be job changes under the free trade agreement, it's somehow that this is new to Albertans and Canadians. We'll do very well under the free trade agreement, and it'll be as a result of the initiative and the hard work and the dedication of Albertans in that participating in that opportunity.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, to either the Premier or the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, what assessment has the provincial government received from the federal government that the Mulroney trade deal could be in some jeopardy because of a constitutional problem in the United States dealing with Alaska oil coming into Canada?
Mr. Speaker, the matter is now before the the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States, and that is one of the issues that is being raised relative to the trade agreement. I can't answer the honourable member as to the outcome of that particular question, but there's no doubt a matter that will be resolved within the United States itself, and that's certainly not within the jurisdiction of the Government of Canada or the Government of the Province of Alberta to answer as to the constitutional issues within the United States. We have enough of our own to deal with.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member did ask as well myself in that question. I should point out to him that the ambassador from Canada to the United States, Mr. Gottlieb, has, in conversations with me, made it quite clear that he feels while there's a great debate going on in the United States, and there are little hang-ups over some issues, that he feels that this trade arrangement will be approved by Congress, and it's a very positive move for Canada, a very positive move for Alberta, because of the tremendous opportunities it provides for Alberta's entrepreneurs. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, just in confirming the comments from the Minister of Career Development and Employment to the member for Meadowlark, the real opportunities here are for the people of Alberta, the businesses. And while you may have some left-leaning Liberals and NDP who don't like the fact that it reduces the impact of the state on the public, it frees up businessmen and individuals take advantage of this agreement. And we don't want the state in there with their left-leaning thoughts about taking over from the businesses. We want the businesses to do it, and they will in this province.
Red Deer South. Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting to note that from time to time across the way they express some concern about jobs in this Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to continue once the Leader of the Opposition regains his composure and calls in the troops. But to the Attorney General, again in recognition of a concern about jobs in this province, and I recognize that our unemployment is dropping rapidly, but could the Attorney General tell this Assembly how many jobs in this province are currently trade-related, and how many jobs in this province we stand to gain as a result of this new initiative?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the statistics right at hand, but it is being estimated by reliable economic forecasters that the increase in jobs in Alberta as a result of the implementation of the free trade agreement will be greater than in any other province, and that it will provide substantial new opportunities for entrepreneurs and small businesses to expand their opportunities in the United States, and the economic benefits will far, far outweigh any negatives.
Thank you. Time for question period has expired. Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to the introduction of special guests? Opposed? Carried. Member for Innisfail, followed by the member for Redwater. Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 35 grade 9 students from the Delburn School in the constituency of Innisfail. They are seated in the members' gallery and are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Colleen Butler, Mr. Gary Taylor, and Mr. Randy Tuff. I'd ask them to rise and please receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Redwater, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and to the rest of the Assembly 30 grade 6 students from the County of Torhild Central School located in the village of Torhild. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Ken Zenek, and one parent, Mrs. Darlene Armstrong, and they are seated in the members' gallery, and I ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
We have what, a variation in procedure here?
I would like to rise on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, under those provisions of Beauchesne relating to answers to questions. It's my contention that the Premier's answer to my question 1 was out of order to the extent that it should have been given at the time I answered the question, at a time when I would have had a chance to therefore rise and ask supplementary questions. If he wants to give supplementary information, it should be done in keeping with the rules and regulations of this House, which permits him, and rightly so, to do that at the end of question period, and then permits me to rise on at least 2 occasions to ask supplementary questions. The second provision under which I rise is the fact that his answer clearly and specifically was designed to provoke debate. And while I don't mind debate being provoked in this legislature, of course, what I do mind was the premise upon which that answer was presented, and it was presented in a very frivolous manner. The fact of the matter is that we're not dealing with averages, we're not dealing with overall concept, we're dealing with specific human beings who are going to lose jobs and who are being treated in a very frivolous manner.
Thank you. Order, please. Order.